Welcome to our virtual faith study. I don't remember which number this one is, but we're moving along, and this question comes from someone in our Bethany family, and he asks the question, can you believe in evolution and be a Christian? And it's interesting to me that I get this question in the United Church in 2020 because among my colleagues who are United Church ministers, there is no debate. In the United Church, for as long as I have been alive, for I would suggest for as long as the United Church has been in existence, which is 1925, and certainly well before that, within the traditions of Presbyterianism and Methodism, there is absolutely a belief that as we as human beings came to be as we are today, there is absolute certainty that the way in which this occurred included evolution. The science is irrefutable. I don't know very many reputable scientists, the number of reputable scientists who would dispute evolution are pretty small. And we need to be honest about that. Most of the people that I know who dispute evolution and hold to what's called creationism, which has come to mean belief in the literal translation of the Bible, most of those folk are not people who have invested a lot of their time in the scientific method. And so one has to ask this basic question: why would God give us reason? Why would God give us a mind that discerns and questions? How is it possible that human beings have this thirst to understand our planet, the way in which our bodies work, how we live physically in our world, how we live and die, and so on? How is it possible that we have been given all of these traits, and yet as all of those things lead us to only one conclusion, which is that we evolved into the state in which we find ourselves, that somehow that is incorrect. It just defies. The people of God, the people of Israel, the Jewish people, the people who called themselves God's people, and who recorded first orally, passing on, and then recording in print, if you will, what we call the Old Testament, which is the canon of the Jewish people. They never understood that their stories were meant to be literal. It's only our Western minds, which we tend to like things to be provable, right? And so I've shared this story before, that the Western mind, which has, by the way, helped us to develop technology, to be innovators in science, to be very good at capitalism, all of those things, the technique of our minds, as George Grant would say, which has been so beneficial to us in terms of eradicating disease, developing technology, and so on, has also meant that we sometimes miss what the Eastern part of the world has to offer, which is that understanding a story as true does not mean that all of the elements thereof actually happened as historical fact, right? So many of the great stories in our Bible, like the parable of the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son, all of these great stories are not meant to be taken literally. In other words, it's not important whether or not there was an actual Samaritan who helped an actual Jew get out of a ditch, and there was an actual priest and an actual lawyer who walked by. The story itself resonates because that story tells us something about who we are. And likewise, if you read your Bible, and note that I'm not holding it upside down, if you read your Bible, if you read the book of Genesis, chapter 1, and then read the book of Genesis, chapter 2, one thing you'll notice is that they were written by different authors, and that the order of creation, the order in which God made the world, is slightly different. And I challenge you to read Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. You will discover that the order is not the same. This is a very common technique that we use in confirmation class, where we help young people who are learning to become members of the church, that the Bible is not something that we receive as literal scientific fact. They are stories that help us understand the nature of how God is. So when people were sharing story and passing it on from generation to generation, they would tell the story about how God had come to give us life. And it was a story, obviously, that begins with God looking out and saying, I need a relationship, and I will create out of a need for relationship. And I will create planets. I will create a universe. I will create, within those things, I will create land and sea. I will create vegetation. I will create the air that we breathe. I will create all of this, and I will make it, if you will, to have a relationship. We are born to be in relationship. That's why all of the great commandments involve relationship. That's how we were born to be. Because in the nature of how our God came to create all that is, was the desire for a relationship. And so what's important about the book of Genesis, and in particular the first two chapters, is not that the first two chapters of Genesis are a high school science textbook, or a biology textbook, or physics textbook. What they are is a blueprint, if you will, as to what is the purpose of creation. I am not terribly interested to know exactly how we came to be, but I am fascinated to understand how we understand our purpose here. I want to know desperately what our purpose is as human beings, making sense of our lives. Some of us, as you know, live to be a young age, some live to be a middle age, some live to be an older age. But no matter how long we live, we are given the thirst to know what it is that we are called to be and how we are called to live. And from the outset, in the two books, in the first two chapters of Genesis, we are given that knowledge, which is that God made the earth, made creation, all there is, as a gift. And then at the very end of that, there is the notion that there are human beings who carry with them the ability to reason and to have some control. The word dominion is used, which is not meant to be over and above, but rather in stewardship and care. And because we have that ability, we are given the responsibility amongst all creation to look after all that is. And we have not done a very good job of that. we are also called to understand in that great story of the Garden of Eden that there is within this beauty that we are given and all of the abundance, certain things in which we must accept, right? And that is that God has given us a purpose. And if we try to go beyond that purpose, we always end up causing damage. And so one of the great messages that comes out, if you will, of our story of creation is the understanding of who we are in God's world. And so, my friends, I would just conclude and say that yes, you can believe in evolution and you can be a Christian. In fact, I would argue that most Christians in this world believe in evolution. Not all are willing to say that out loud because there is a loud minority of people who insist on a literal interpretation. I don't frankly understand how they can believe in science in every matter of human life except in its most in that most elemental way, which is how we came to be. I don't understand how you can pick and choose what science you will accept and what science you won't. Believe me, I don't understand that. We understand that science is part of being human. It's part of understanding. And as United Church people, as many churches, we accept science and we accept evolution and we accept as Christians that behind all of this is a God who made us with a purpose. Thanks be to God. Amen.
This is God's wondrous world, and to my listening ears, all nature sings, and around me rings the music of the spheres. This is God's wondrous world. I rest in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, God's hand the wonders wrought. This